Hey, good evening. Hope you're all well. Today we're going to be learning Maseches Menachos, Daf Lamed Beis, and we're starting at the bottom of Lamed Aleph Lamed Beis, 4 lines from the bottom. Amar Rabbi Chalbo. Rabbi Chalbo said that when they were wrapping up a mezuzah, what direction do you wrap it in? So the Gemara says, Chazina leila Rav Huna. He watched Rav Huna to karich le me echad klape shma, that he would wrap from echad to shma, which means he'd wrap from the left side of the klaf. Like, look, we're holding right here. Hebrew is right to left. So if it's from Shema Yisrael Shem Elokeinu Shem Echad, you're wrapping from the left side of the paper into the right side of the paper. That was halacha number one. And number two is Va'osa Parshios Stumos, that the two parshios that are found inside a mezuzah are stumos. We know, of course, if you've ever looked into a Sefer Torah, you'll know that there are stumos and psuchos. A stuma is when one paragraph ends and the new paragraph begins on the same line that the previous paragraph ended. A psucha is when a paragraph ends and then the new paragraph starts on the next line. So the Gemara here says that Rav Huna was of the opinion that va'osa parshio seha stumos. The Gemara says, wait 1 second. How can you say the parshio seha were stumos? It must have been that they were psuchos. Meisve, we have a brisa. Amr Reb Shimon ben Elazar, last line on Lamed Aleph Amid Beis. Rav Meir have a kosva al duchsustos. Rav Meir used to write mezuzahs on duchsustos, which is the outermost layer of skin where the hair grows from, kimin daf, and he would make it kimin daf like column. That's what Rashi says at the bottom. Kimin amud shebisfarim arucha uktsara. He would make it like a Sefer Torah, longer, thinner columns. Va'osa revach milamala, the revach milamata, and he would leave space on the top and bottom of the mezuzahs. And look at this line, because this is the problem that we have with our Gemara. And the parshios that were done psuchos. They weren't done stumos. Now Rav Huna was quoted by Rabbi Chalbo on the bottom, having said that it was done stumos. Not true. We have a brisa that says not like you, that it was done psuchos. And says the Gemara, Amarti lo, I said to him. So we have to look back and see who's talking in the brisa. It's Reb Shimon ben Elazar that Rav Meir was writing. So Rav Shimon ben Elazar says to Rav Meir, he says, Rebbe, matam. What's the reason why you say this? And he responds, Amar li, hoel ve'ein smuchos min Torah. Because go look in Chumash. The parsha of the Ahavta and the parsha of the Hayoim Shema are not even in the same parsha. They're in different parts of the Torah. They're in Sefer Dvarim. They're different prakim altogether. They're Be'ekev and Ba'eschanan, I believe, are the two parshios. So they're not, what? Right. So clearly they should not be stumos. Obviously they should be psuchos. How could you make them stumos in the mezuzah? Hare, they're not even stumos in chomesh. Ve'ein smuchos min Torah. And then on this brisa, Amar Reb Chananel, Amar Rav says halacha Reb Shimon ben Elazar, that it must be done like all of these halachos. What were all of the halachos of Reb Shimon ben Elazar? So if we look back, we'll see that the halachos were as follows. Number one, that it had to be written on duchsustos, which is the outer layer of skin. Number two, it had to be written in narrower lines, longer rectangle. Number three was revach lamala. Number four was revach lamata. Number five was parshio seha psuchos. And Rav says, halacha Reb Shimon ben Elazar, my lava psuchos. Doesn't that mean that we paskin halacha lemaisa? Rav was the earliest Amora. So how can a later Amora of Rav Huna come along and say, no, it's stumos? What are you talking about? You've got a brisa with Rav Shimon ben Elazar. No way. And we pass it that way. The Chora, it must be talking about psuchos. So what it says, my lava psuchos. So the Gemara says, lo. When Rav Chananel, in the name of Rav, says that the halacha is Reb Shimon ben Elazar, he was only talking about arevach. He was just talking about the space that was maintained at the top and bottom of the klaf of the mezuzah. Otherwise, we don't hold like the other portions of the brisa of Reb Shimon ben Elazar. The kama revach. Well, let's get into some of the weeds a little bit. How much was the revach at the top and bottom of the mezuzah? Amar of Menachos bar Yaakov. Menachos bar Yaakov said, some people say it was authored by someone else. V'amrei la, Amar of Shmuel bar Yaakov, kimalo atva de sifri. It was like the clasp of a sofer. The sofer would take a clasp and he would kind of hold it, grip it to the table. You know, now you can go to like Home Depot and buy these like strong spring-loaded clasps. Whatever was the equivalent in their day, that was the amount of space that they saved. I'm going to make this up. Let's say that the gripper was a half an inch. So they saved the half an inch of space at the top or bottom of the mezuzah so that they could hold it in place, the cloth. That's how big the revach is. Amar le Abai le Rabbi Yosef, ve'at lo tizbara dechi Amar Rav arevach. Everybody knows that Rav was only talking about revach and that he wasn't talking about stumos because of the following. We know the Harav Islam minhaga. Rav holds stark of minhagim. The ha'idna, and nowadays, referring to how we write mezuzahs, nahug alma bistumos. Seems to be that the custom is that way, and it obviously means that he didn't hold that the Bryce of Reb Shimon ben Elazar was correct in regards to that aspect of Reb Shimon ben Elazar holding that a mezuzah was written with psuchos. No, they were not written with psuchos, they were written with stumos. And we know that Rav always holds of minhagim. What's the precedence for Rav to always hold like a minhag? So says the Gemara about a third of the way down on Lamed Beis Amud Aleph. Da'amar Rabba, Amar Rav Kahana, Amar Rav. Im Yavo Eliyahu, if Eliyahu Navi shows up, he should come soon. But Yomar Cholzin b'minal, if he says we do chalitza with a shoe, shomin lo, we listen to him. But if he says ein cholzin b'sandal, the Torah speaks about a shoe. You want to say you shouldn't use a sandal. So what's the din? Ein shomin lo. Why not? What does Rav say? This is our precedent that Rav always follows a minhag. Shekvar nohagu ha'am b'sandal. It can't be even against Eliyahu Navi. I'm sorry. The minhag is this way. This is what we do. They are written with stumos. So that's one version. For Rav Yosef Amar Rav Kahana, Amar Rav, he said a little bit of a different version of this. We're halfway down on Lamed Beis Amud Aleph, and the Gemara says as follows: Im Yavu Eliyahu Yomar ein cholzin b'minal. We don't use a shoe, then shomen lo. That's different than version 1. And if he says, if Eliyahu Navi says ein cholzin b'sandal, ein shomen lo, shekvar noagu am b'sandal. So we see here a difference in the first part of the phraseology by the minal. So the Gemara says ve'amrinan, a little bit more than halfway down. Mai beinayu. What's the difference between the version of the Gemara presented by Rabbah in the name of Rav Kahana in the name of Rav, and the version of the Gemara that's Rav Yosef in the name of Rav Kahana Marab? My beinayu, says the Gemara. The Gemara says the nafkamina is mina lechatchila ika beinayu. Now, we're not going to get into the sugyas of chalitza. We've already done this. Amoli did this probably years ago at this point, but we're not going to get into the sugya. But what we see from here is that Rav is driven by minhag. So obviously, if the minhag today is to write a mezuzah with stumos, that's what he's going to do. There's no way Rav would have said that the Bryce of Reb Shimon ben Elazar was correct in that way. No way. Therefore, Rav must have only held Elolav Shma Mina, that when Rav was saying the halachas like Reb Shimon ben Elazar, that's only areva. That was only talking about the space that was required on the margins of the mezuzah, Shma Mina. Says the Gemara, 10 lines from the bottom of Nachman Bar Yitzchak Amar, mitzvah la'asos on stumos. Forget about minhagim. He says it's a mitzvah. And he adds, V'i avdinhu psuchos shapir dami. If it's only okay that way, then what's the din of Reb Shimon ben Elazar? Says the Gemara, Umay psuchos tika'amar Reb Shimon ben Elazar, af psuchos. He didn't. We've completely misunderstood the Bryce of Reb Shimon ben Elazar. He meant to say that stumos are wonderful and we can even do psuchos. We misunderstood. There wasn't enough nuance in his lashon. So that's why the Gemara says that that we hold this way, that according to this version of the Gemara, even Reb Shimon ben Elazar was of the opinion that stumos were good. He just held af psuchos. And perhaps lema misayele, maybe we can carry this idea further. Kayotzebo, a word is obviously out of context over here, but it is part of the Gemara in Yevamos. Kayotzebo, the halacha applies in the following place. Sefer Torah Shabala. If there's a Sefer Torah that's worn out, utfilin Shabalu. If you have the parshios of tefillin that are worn out. Last of the short lines, ein osin mehen mezuzah. You're not allowed to take the cloth of a Sefer Torah or the cloth of tefillin and utilize the Shema and the V'hayoim Shamoah for the sake of a mezuzah. You're not allowed. Why? So the Gemara, you're not allowed to take parchment, a cloth that has psukim on it, mefurashos, and say, it used to be a Sefer Torah. This parsha, l'chol hapachos, is good from the Sefer Torah. Let me cut it out. I'll turn it into a mezuzah. I'll recycle a little bit. Let me just use it instead of not use it. I don't want to put it in shemus. You're not allowed to do that. Okay? Now the Gemara makes a diuk from here, and the Gemara is going to ask 3 different questions on the diuk. Here is number 1. If not for the halacha of ein moridin mikdusha chamura lekdusha kala, hamoridin osit, we would have allowed for that to happen, to allow for the text of a Sefer Torah or tefillin to be used for mezuzah. But that's impossible, says the Gemara. Why? Amai, how can that be? Hacha stumos, v'hacha psuchos. In the mezuzah, everything's stuma. But in chumash, it's not stumos, it's psuchos. So the parshios were not aligned, meaning if you cut out one of those parshios, it's not going to look right. There need to be other words on the line. The pasuk of the paragraph of Shema and V'ahavta have to end on one line with V'yam Shema starting on a second line. So that can't be. So says the Gemara, Dilma, perhaps your question is not a good question. Maybe it's only lahashlim. Maybe there was just a reparative word or a line that could have been replaced. And we're just going to cut out with our scalpel. We're going to cut out the one set of words we need and glue it in to the mezuzah. Maybe that's allowed. So that was all question number one. Says the Gemara, Hamorida and Osin, had it been that it wasn't a Kedusha Chamura to a Kedusha Kala, you're saying that we would have been allowed to take a Parsha from a Sefer Torah or Tefillin and bring them down to a lower level. You're saying that without that halacha of Kedusha Chamura, Kedusha Kala, we could have used it? How can you say that? Ve'otanya, halacha l'Moshe misinai, Tefillin al haklaf, umezuzah al haduchsustus. The halacha is that tefillin is written on regular cloth. That's a lower, deeper layer of skin. And mezuzah was written on duchsustos, which was the outer layer of skin. And the Gemara, the Brisa, actually defines for us what duchsustos is and what cloth is. Says the Gemara, cloth b'makom basar. Cloth is the layer of skin where on its inner side was touching the actual flesh of the animal, not skin, but flesh. And duchsustos was b'makom se'ar. So how can you tell me that you can take the cloth from a Sefer Torah and use it for a mezuzah? Hooray, there are different kinds of cloth. You're not allowed to use duchsustas for cloth. You're not allowed to use cloth for duchsustas. Says the Gemara, that's only true mitzvah. That's only true lechatchila, but b'di'evet it's allowed. Rashi says mitzvah, 5 lines from the bottom of Rashi, right side of the page, 4 lines, excuse me. Mitzvahs tefillin al haklaf, umezuzah ad duchsustus. Valim shina ein bekach klum. That's what the Gemara says. Very good. So the Gemara says, wait 1 second. Tanya, you're going to tell me that b'di'evet it's kosher to use the wrong kind of cloth for a mezuzah and for tefillin? That's not true. Tanya, shina, if you do change it, then puzzle. Says the Gemara, only b'tefillin. The Gemara says that's only true with tefillin, but by mezuzah we're allowed to be mekel. That means if we were to be poskim and we were to draw a conclusion from the Gemara, it would seem to be that by tefillin you're not allowed to swap out the cloth quality from cloth to duchsustus or vice versa, but by mezuzah you are allowed. And therefore, thus far, what would we see? That if you needed to cut out a little section from a Sefer Torah or from a tefillin, even though the cloth is a different material, you're allowed to bring it into a mezuzah, paste it in, Shalom al Yisrael, you're good to go. Says the Gemara, wait, this still doesn't work. Vatanya, you can't say that the din of Shina Puzzle, that it's only true by tefillin. After all, the Brisa says, Shina vein bazeh uvein bazeh Puzzle. The Chora, we should be assered from switching the cloth quality of duchsustus to cloth and vice versa, both by mezuzah and by tefillin, not just by one. Says the Gemara, no, you learned it wrong. Idi ve'idi b'tefillin. Both languages of vein bazeh uvein bazeh are talking about tefillin. It's not that one's talking about tefillin, one's talking about mezuzah. You misunderstood. How is it that both are talking about the din of tefillin? In one case, it's referring to kasvinhu aklaf b'makom seyar, where you wrote on the cloth, but on the other side of the cloth, not the side of the cloth that's closer to the basar, but the side of the cloth that's closer to the hair. That's one limiter. And v'ha, turning to the top of Lamed Beis, the kasvinhu aduchsustus b'makom basar. The other is if you write on the outer layer of flesh, but not on the side of the seyar, but rather on the inside that's closer to that deeper layer of skin. And that's not allowed. Those are the two edi v'edis that would be puzzle. There's another way we could understand this brisa. When the brisa says shina bazeh uvazeh, really tanoihi, really it's a machlokas tanoim. What's the machlokas tanoim? A drastic difference in shitas. Says the Gemara a couple lines down, Titanya. Shina bazeh uvazeh puzzle. But Rav Acha machsher mishum Rabbi Achoy b'Reb Chanina. He's going to be matir in such a case, meaning it could even be that one bazeh is tefillin and one bazeh is mezuzah. Could be. And there's going to be a Tana that asers, but there's also a Tana that's machshir, and that is Rabbi Achoy b'Reb Chanina. The Amrei La, some say it was somebody else, that it was mishmei to Rabbi Akiva b'Reb Chanina. Now, I had pointed out earlier that when we were talking about lowering the status of Kedusha from using the parshios that are inside a Sefer Torah or Tefillin to be used for a mezuzah, there were three questions. We asked two. Here is the third, 5 lines down, Lamed Beis Mid Beis. The Gemara says, Hamoridin Osin, that without the halacha, that you're not allowed to go from Chamura, from Kedusha Chamura to Kedusha Kala. Without that, you would have done it. But how can you do that? We have another problem. The Haboya Sirtut. We know that parshios are scored. If you ever look in a Sefer Torah, ours are beautiful. The scoring is perfectly even, gorgeous scoring. Says the Gemara, we require sirtut. Where do we require sirtut? Let's see the Gemara. The Amar of Minyumi bar Chilkiya, Amar Rav Chama bar Guria, Amar Rav. Rav teaches us a din. Kol mezuzah she'ena misuretes. Any mezuzah that is not pre-scored, so that it can be written in an extremely beautiful way. Psula. Halacha is that, so now you're going to tell me you're taking a parsha from Tefillin where there's no sirtut and you're going to put it in a mezuzah? You're missing a fundamental din. The Rav Minyamin bar Chilkiya Didei, he himself held Amar sirtut shel mezuzah halacha l'Moshe Sinai. Even if you want to say the halacha of going from Kedusha Chamura to Kedusha Kala isn't the problem, fine, that's great. But still, there's no sirtut on a parsha of tefillin. Mechatesi, you could put it in a mezuzah. It's missing something fundamental. Says the Gemara, this too is a machlokes tanoim tanoihi. Titania, the Brisa writes, Rabbi Yirmiyah Omer Mishum Rabbeinu, tefillin umezuzos nichtavos shalom min aksav. The ein tzrichos sirtut. Double halacha. Number one, when you write tefillin and mezuzos, this is not true by a Sefer Torah. By a Sefer Torah, you have to look in another Sefer Torah. Breshis, and then I can write Breshis. Bara, and then I can write Bara. But when it comes to tefillin and mezuzos, we know these parshios so well, or so we would hope, you don't even need to copy word for word. Okay? If you read the parshios after putting on your tefillin, on the days when I have time, I do. It's not so often. It's beautiful. You'll know them by heart. Petarechem, all those psukim, you should know them by heart. So the Gemara says in the name of Rabbi Yirmiyah, it's a brisa, that they're nichtavos shalom min aksav. I don't have to copy word for word. Din number one. Din number two is he holds tefillin and mezuzos ein tzrichos sirtut. So he says that they don't require sirtut. Okay, that's a big shock. So we see a machlokes tanaim. One, we know by tefillin that we do, but when it comes to mezuzos, there is a shita that holds. We know by tefillin that we don't, but over here we see another shita that by mezuzos that the halacha is, according to not the halacha, but it's machlokes, that he holds ein tzrichos sirtos. How do we pass in halacha l'maisa? The hilchasa, the halacha is tefillin lo bay sirtut. The tefillin that we have in our batim, they're not pre-scored, they don't have lines. Umezuzah bay sirtut. The idi nichtavos shalom min aksav. Why is it that we allow them to be written without looking at a parsha that we know was written correctly? Because, says the Gemara, my taima, migras grisen. It should fall off of our lips. We should know them so well. Who doesn't know the first paragraph of Shema? Who doesn't know Vayom Shema? Okay, you want to tell me you don't read the parshas after tefillin? Maybe. Fine. We shouldn't be so from that. That's great. But that is, in fact, the din. So far, so good. We're about halfway down to Lamed Beis Mid Beis. We're going to wrap up to Lamed Gimel Lamed Aleph, and let's continue with a unique halacha about sitting on a bed while there is a Sefer Torah on that bed. I know I've seen people be makbid on this. We don't sit on couches when a Sefer's on the same pillow. If you have that couch that's all one long bench, that's problematic. If you have separate pillows, givaldik, now you're not sitting on the same thing. The root of these ideas is found in this Gemara. Omar Rabbi Chalbo, Ona chazise le Rav Huna. I witnessed, he said, Rav Huna was about to sit on a bed to have a Yosef Apuria. Apuria is the Aramaic word for bed. I was about to sit on the bed to Sefer Torah alei. What did he do before he sat down? The kaf lekada a'ara. He took a container and he flipped it upside down and put it on the floor. The anach alei Sefer Torah, and he took the Sefer Torah, put it on that inverted kli that was on the ground, and then Yosef b'mita. Then he sat down on the bed. It sounds like kasavar. What does it sound like he holds? Aser leshev al gabe mita shesefer Torah munach aleha. Sounds pretty pasha. It's intuitive to us to not sit on a couch when there's a bed there. Maybe when there's a sefer, we're a little bit more makeup. We really probably should be machmer. This is actually, this idea, this shita of aser leshev is quoted in the Rambam and quoted in Yoredeya in Siman Reish Pei Beis by the halachos of being mechabed a sefer Torah. Says the Gemara, Not everybody holds that way. Upliga de Rabba Bar Chana. Dam Rabba Bar Chana Rav Yochanan. Motor le shev al gabe mitash sefer Torah munach aleha. Oh, do we say like Rabbi Yochanan that it's mutter, or do we say like Rabbi Chalbo in the name of Rav Huna that it's usher to sit on a bed upon which there is a Sefer Torah? And continues Rav Yochanan, I don't want you to make any mistakes. If someone's going to whisper to you the following, Maisa b'Rebbe Lazar, there really was taka, a story with Rebbe Lazar. What was the story? Yoshev alamita, he was sitting on a bed and there was a Sefer Torah there. The Nizkar Sefer Torah munach aleha, the Nishmat, and then he slipped off. He himself hopped off the bed. The Yoshev al garbi karka, and he of course sat on the floor. The Domek mishe kisho nachash. He couldn't believe it. Omed bebehala. There was this big diyun happening between a Reform Yid and an Orthodox Yid. And they were sitting and they were handling in which hashkafa was correct. The sefer that the Yid had, that the Frum Yid had, fell on the floor. He jumped and he grabbed the sefer and gave it a big kiss. Someone in the room said, now I know whose Torah is emes. Now I know. The Yid jumped when the sefer fell. You're machshav the Torah, you're machshav the sefer. And that's a sefer that was printed on a Xerox machine. It isn't even it's not klaf and mukaf kvil. Pashut, we're going to be more machmer. So says the Gemara, you might think, Rebbe Lazar, he sat on the bed. No, you got the story wrong. Hasam sefer Torah al gabe karkahava, and a pashut that he jumped to pick it up. Obviously, that's k'mishi kisha nachash. We would all react the same exact way. It's when they pick the wrong guy for Hagbah. You can't help yourself. You're like lunging to catch the Yatzei Chaim because you're afraid it's going to hit the floor. You're not even worried about the fast. How could you treat the Sefer Torah not nicely? Good. Says the Gemara, 7 lines from the bottom, 2 lines before the wide lines. Amar Rabbi Yehuda Mar Shmuel, Kasva Igeres Psula. If you write a mezuzah like a letter, it is considered puzzle. Rashi gives parameters for this. 10 lines down in Rashi. Dibra Maskal, Kasva Igeres. Below sirtut, it wasn't pre-scored. Below dikdik bechaseros v'yaseros, ki geres be'alma, you were pashat scribbling. Okay, you wrote all the words, but you weren't makbid on chaser and malay with an extra vav, not an extra vav. You wrote an aleph instead of an ayin. Obviously, that's not going to be kosher, says the Gemara Psula, my timer, because asi ksiva mi sefer. We know that from a sefer Torah, we're makbid gomer. It has to be correct. Obviously, it has to be correct. I did a bris in someone's house. I could see through their mezuzah that the paper was Xerox paper. I could see it. So I said to them, do you mind if I buy you a mezuzah? I'll send a parsha to your house. I didn't know. I didn't know. It was a little complicated, whatever. We'll get into the story later. Okay. First of the long lines. Let's get into Yehuda. Let's talk about some halachos of hanging up a mezuzah. The Gemara says, Tila b'makel psula. If you take a mezuzah and you just kind of hang it on a nail, it's not affixed to the wall. It's just hanging. In other words, it's removable. If you have this thing that you could just hang up and take down, psula, that's not a kosher mezuzah. And the 3M tape that's sticky, no problem. Nail it in, no problem. By the way, if you've ever been to something like the Altaheim, you see some of these homes where the mezuzah is built into the frame, flush with the wall. There's a lashon in our Gemara that we're about to see that might be the source for why some people built their mezuzahs that way. When I went to Poland many, many years ago, we saw that all over the place. In old homes in Svas, you also see that. In Eretz Yisrael, you see it there too. It says the Gemara, my taima. Why is it that it can't be tala'a b'makel? It has to be affixed because b'sha'arecha ba'inan. That's not part of your house. A picture hanging on your wall, not part of your house. You want to screw it in? Okay, that's part of your house. Got it. Tanya Nami Hachi, the Brisa agrees with this din. Rabbi Yehuda Amar Shmuel has a Brisa. Tala b'makel, if you hang up the mezuzah without affixing it to the wall, o shehinicha achar hadeles, or you put it achar hadeles. What does it mean, shehinicha achar hadeles? Rashi, halfway down. Look at this halacha. Shehinicha achore hadeles, shekiva bekosel achore hadeles. Meaning it's not within the door frame, it's on the wall outside the door. L'chora, that's what Rashi means. I don't know what else Rashi could mean.
Inside your house.
Inside. So the Gemara says there, no dice. That also doesn't work. And look what the Brisa says. Sakana. You're not protected. You're not protected by the mezuzah. And ve'ein ba mitzvah. Then there's no mitzvah. You're done. Double. It's an interesting Brisa. Why did you say so? We're not talking about sakana. We're talking about halacha right now. But so says the Gemara that there is a sakana. Rashi, sakana. Sakana mina mazikin. She'ein habayis mishtamer ba achik ba'ena b'tzuras hapesach kilchasa. The protection of the mezuzah is not just having one in your house. It's when it's affixed to the wall, bisha arecha, inside the door frame. Now, we have all seen scenarios where the mezuzah is actually outside. That's fine as long as you have another mezuzah on the whole bias. No problem. If you have no choice, but you would not make a bracha putting up that mezuzah because it's in the wrong place. You don't get shmira from it, but it's still good to put there. And in fact, there's a story exactly like this. Shalbes Munbaz Hamelech. The people who were part of the kingdom of Munbaz, Hayu Osen Bepundikosehen, in their hotels, in the inns that they managed, they didn't actually affix their mezuzahs. Why? Because there's no din for the people staying in that hotel to have a mezuzah. There's no din for them. So they had no need to affix it properly.
No shmira in those inns?
Correct. No shmira unless if it's not your house. You don't need the mezuzah doesn't need to protect you in that way. It's not your home. It's a din.
No, I understand that, but just in general,
correct.
To have the shmira.
Even if there was a mezuzah, it would not be your shmira l'chora because it's not for you. That's possible.
No, I'm saying if you're in that room and you don't have the shmira, then you don't have the shmira.
Yeah, but there's no chiyuv for it. Let's say it this way: there's no chiyuv to have a mezuzah in that case. Right. Let's say you rent an apartment for 30 days. You have 20 days. You have no obligation to have a mezuzah. But if you buy a house, there is no waiting period. Then you're obligated right away. I found that out the expensive way because when I moved into my house, I thought for some reason, because I thought I know stuff. No, I know dangerous amounts. So I said to Rabbi first, I called him like, Rebbe, I have 30 days, right? He's like, no, go right now and spend $1,000 on Klaffen. What are you talking about? So I maxed out my credit card at Kesher Stam. It was amazing. And then I had mezuzahs. Okay, so there they did. So look what the Gemara says. And they did this cane, zecher lemezuzah. It wasn't even halacha l'mayz about mezuzah. We just didn't want to forget about mezuzah. Says the Gemara, mitzvah lehanicha, not just are you not yotze, but the mitzvah is to place it lehanicha besoch chalolo in the airspace of the tzura of the Pesach, shal Pesach. Says Gemara pshita. We know bish arecha amarachmana. The Torah says it has to be in your gates. So the Gemara says, I have a reason why I need to clarify that it has to be in this, as the Gemara phrase is, bechalalo shal Pesach. Because sal kadaita chamina, I might have thought that hoil ve'amar Rava, that Rava says elsewhere, mitzvah lehaniach betefach hasamach l'rishus harabim. So says the Gemara, kama demerachik ma'ale. I might have thought that the further away it would have been better that way. Kamash malan, that's not true. So let's review this din of Rava. Let's see what he said. He said, because Rava said mitzvah lehaniach betefach hasamach l'rishus harabim, so I might have thought kama demerachik male. So you got to put it all the way against the end, not just tefach, all the way. Kamash malan, that's not true. Fine. Okay, good. We're going to stop right here at the top of this page. Mir Hashem, we'll pick up on Shabbos with the rest of Lamed Gimel and Lamed Dalet. Wishing you all a beautiful night. Mazel Tov to Ari and Shana Shabbat on the gorgeous wedding of their children, Shalva and Zevi.